The Tailor of the Moon. Welcome to the podcast. I am Jimmy, your host. Tonight, we begin with something soft, something quiet, something that absolutely does not need your full attention. So dim the lights. Let your shoulders drop. Unclench your jaw. If your thoughts wander, that's fine. They always do. They'll come back when they feel like it, or not. Tonight, we're talking about a tailor. Not a heroic one. Not a particularly ambitious one either. Just an old man with steady hands, a habit of humming out of tune, and a job no one officially remembered giving him. Which is usually how the most interesting jobs work. The moon, as it turns out, wears out over time. People don't like to hear that. They prefer their celestial objects eternal and pristine. But the moon, much like old royalty or inherited furniture, develops flaws, dark spots, thin places, little stretches where the light fades, not dramatically, but quietly, as if the moon itself is getting tired, and someone has to fix that. Long before anyone wrote poems about moonlight or used it as an excuse for romance or blamed it for odd behavior, because of course they did, there was a tailor who noticed something was wrong. His name was Elias Greystitch. Which sounds like a name someone made up later, and honestly, they probably did. He didn't introduce himself that way. He just said Elias. He lived in a narrow house at the edge of a town that had seen better centuries. The kind of town where autumn seemed permanent, leaves always halfway down, light always golden but tired. Time moved slowly there, partly because no one was in a hurry, and partly because nothing new ever really happened. Elias had been a tailor his whole life. Not famous, not wealthy, just reliable. He stitched coats for men who complained about the cold and dresses for women who pretended not to care how they looked. He repaired cuffs, hemmed trousers, replaced buttons lost to impatience. He worked by lamplight even during the day, said it helped him see the thread better. It also helped him think. At night, when the town went quiet, Elias would sit by the window and look at the moon. Not romantically, not dramatically, just attentively. He noticed the dark places first. They weren't shadows. They didn't move. They were thin, like worn fabric. And being a tailor, he recognized that immediately. Most people would ignore it. Most people did. But Elias had spent decades repairing small problems before they became big ones. And the moon to him looked overdue for maintenance. The first stitch happened almost by accident. One evening, deep into autumn, when the air smelled like smoke and apples and old paper, Elias fell asleep at his work table. Needle still in hand, thread looped around his fingers. He dreamed, which wasn't unusual. But this dream was organized. He was standing somewhere pale and quiet. No ground, no sky, just light. And the moon was close. Close enough to touch. Up close, it looked worse. Cracks, thinning light, places where darkness seeped through like ink on wet cloth. Elias did what he had always done. He reached for his needle. The thread he used wasn't ordinary thread. It shimmered softly, the color of frost and old memories. Where it came from, he couldn't say. It had been in his sewing box for as long as he could remember. He pushed the needle through the moon. There was no resistance, no pain, just a gentle give, like fabric that had been waiting. He made one stitch, then another. The dark spot tightened. The light returned. Elias woke up at his table, heart steady, needle resting beside his hand. Outside, the moon looked better. Not perfect, but improved. He didn't tell anyone. Tailors rarely do. The next night, he dreamed again, and stitched again, and again. Each stitch repaired the moon, and each stitch opened something else. Stories. They seeped through the needle holes, soft at first, like whispers you almost ignore. Elias heard names, places, lives unfolding quietly, forgotten worlds. One story belonged to a queen who ruled for exactly one autumn before marrying someone she didn't love and slowly forgetting herself. Another came from a city built entirely of bells, where no one slept because silence was illegal. There were lovers who met only in reflections, children born with memories that weren't theirs, kingdoms that collapsed not from war, but boredom. Each stitch released a story, and Elias listened. He didn't judge them, didn't try to fix them. He just stitched and listened and let the moon breathe easier. Over time, the moon began to recognize him. It leaned closer when he arrived. Its light softened around his hands. Sometimes it hummed back when he hummed. Romance, if you can call it that, crept in slowly. Not the dramatic kind, the comfortable kind, the sort built on routine and trust. Elias never married, never felt the need. But there was something intimate about repairing the same celestial body night after night, learning its weak points, understanding how it aged. Autumn passed. Then came another, and another. In the town below, people began sleeping better. Dreams grew gentler. Nightmares faded. No one knew why. Of course they didn't. But something else began to happen. The stories started to linger. Elias would wake up with them still echoing in his head. He'd find himself stitching patterns he didn't recognize, symbols that meant something somewhere else. The boundaries were thinning, and somewhere, far beyond the town, beyond the moon, beyond even memory itself, someone noticed that the old tailor was listening, which is usually how trouble begins. But not loud trouble, quiet trouble, the kind that arrives politely and waits its turn. And that is where we'll pause for now. Let the needle rest. Let the moon hold. We'll return to Elias soon, very soon. By the time the old tailor finished his tea, the moon had climbed a little higher, not dramatically. The moon never did anything dramatically. It just drifted, slow, patient, like it had nowhere else to be, which, honestly, it didn't. The tailor's shop sat at the edge of a narrow hill, the kind of hill that never quite made it into maps. Cartographers tended to forget it existed, which was fitting, because forgetting things was the quiet specialty of this place. Inside the shop, Bolts of fabric leaned against the walls like tired old friends. Velvet that smelled faintly of rain. Linen that remembered hands long gone. Thread spools arranged not by color, but by mood. The pale blue thread was calm. The silver thread was nostalgic. The black thread, well, that one sighed a lot. The tailor stood from his chair, joints complaining in a familiar conversational way. He didn't argue with them. There was no point. He crossed the room and reached for a ladder that led nowhere in particular. It simply leaned upward, disappearing into a soft glow in the ceiling, as if the shop itself forgot where solid reality ended. Of course, it led to the moon. Where else would it go? He climbed slowly, not because he was afraid of heights. He'd been doing this for decades, but because rushing felt rude, and the moon disliked rude behavior. As he climbed, the air cooled. Autumn followed him upward, leaf by leaf, until the scent of fallen apples and damp earth faded into something thinner, something quieter. When he stepped off the ladder, he was standing on the moon's surface, which looked nothing like the paintings suggested. There were no dramatic craters, no sharp shadows, just a wide, pale plain stitched together with seams that glowed faintly, like scars that had learned to forgive. The moon greeted him the way it always did, with silence and a soft pull behind the eyes. He knelt beside a dark patch near the edge, running his fingers along it. The darkness here wasn't empty. It was heavy, full, like a pocket stuffed with memories that didn't want to be remembered anymore. "This one's new," he murmured, because he always spoke out loud. The moon listened better that way. From his satchel, he pulled a needle longer than his forearm, curved gently like a crescent smile. He threaded it with silver blue thread, the kind that shimmered when touched by regret. The first stitch went in easily. The moon barely flinched. And then the story opened. The air shifted. The pale surface blurred. And suddenly, the tailor was no longer kneeling on the moon. He stood in a forgotten courtyard, paved with cracked stone and scattered autumn leaves. A palace rose around him, elegant once, tired now. This was clearly a royal problem. It always was. A young king paced near a fountain that no longer worked. He wore a crown too large for his head, and a frown he had inherited along with several unfortunate facial features. He was called the Beloved, which, of course, meant nobody really loved him. The tailor sighed softly. "Ah," he said, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "A romantic tragedy with administrative incompetence." The king stopped pacing and stared straight through him. They never saw the tailor. They only felt him, like a draft through a closed door. This king had loved a poet, not politically useful, not royal, not acceptable. So naturally, the love had been buried under paperwork and arranged marriages and a lifetime of pretending not to feel anything at all. The poet had been sent away. The king stayed. The kingdom survived. Barely. And the love had gone nowhere. It drifted upward, slowly, patiently, until it reached the moon and darkened a patch of it. The tailor watched the king age in minutes, watched the palace crumble politely, watched the courtyard fill with leaves year after year. "Of course you never told anyone," the tailor whispered. "Why would you?" He finished the stitch. The courtyard faded. The moon returned. The dark patch softened, turning pale and luminous again, like a memory finally allowed to rest. The tailor tied off the thread with care. No knot too tight. No knot too loose. Balance mattered. He stood, brushing moon dust from his knees. Below him, the world turned quietly. Above him, stars pretended not to notice his work. There were many more dark places waiting, some older, some sharper, some full of romances that never even got the dignity of tragedy. He glanced back toward the ladder, already feeling the familiar pull of the next stitch. The moon wasn't finished with him yet. By the time autumn reached the lower valleys, the old tailor had already lost track of how many nights he'd climbed the long silver ladder. The moon no longer felt distant or sacred. It felt familiar, like a quiet workshop that smelled faintly of dust, cold stone, and something vaguely nostalgic, probably regret. The moon had a lot of that. The tailor never rushed. He stitched the way some people pray, slow, repetitive, almost absent-minded. Pull the needle through, tighten the thread, pause, look down at the world turning gently beneath him. Repeat. Of course he did it this way. Anyone who stitches celestial bodies in a hurry tends to make things worse. The dark spots on the moon had grown more numerous. Not larger, just more of them. Small bruises, tiny silences, places where light seemed tired and decided to sit down for a while. The moon didn't complain. It never did. But the tailor could feel it, the way you can feel a room go quiet after someone says something uncomfortable. Tonight, the patch waiting for him shimmered differently. This one wasn't grey or silver. It had colour. Muted, yes, but colour nonetheless. Soft rust tones. Burned orange. The kind of shades you only get in late autumn, when leaves are halfway between beautiful and done trying. The tailor sighed, because of course it was an autumn memory. Everything meaningful always was. He threaded the needle and began. The stitch opened slowly, like a reluctant eye, and suddenly the moon was no longer beneath his feet. He stood in a city made entirely of staircases. Not metaphorical staircases, literal ones. Stone steps, wooden steps, narrow spirals, wide ceremonial stairs that led nowhere in particular. They climbed over rooftops, dipped under archways, and twisted around buildings like afterthoughts. No one seemed bothered by this. Of course they weren't. They had grown up here. This was Valistep. The tailor recognized the name immediately, which was unfortunate because he had been hoping not to. Valistep was one of those places historians loved to romanticize. A city of ambition. A city where every problem could supposedly be solved by climbing higher. It sounded inspirational. It wasn't. The air smelled like old stone and wet leaves. Lanterns flickered, casting amber light that made everything look kinder than it really was. Autumn had settled deep into the cracks of the city, and it wasn't planning to leave. People moved slowly here, carefully. Everyone was watching their footing. Everyone always was. Falling was considered embarrassing. Falling far enough was considered final. The tailor walked, his boots echoing softly on the steps. He passed merchants selling handrails carved with prayers. Lovers sat halfway up staircases holding hands, pretending they weren't afraid of heights. Children practiced climbing with serious expressions because Valistep raised its children early. At the top of the highest staircase sat a woman wrapped in a rust-colored cloak. She was young, too young to look this tired. Her hair was dark and pulled back without care. Her hands were ink-stained. She was writing something on a thin slate, erasing it, then writing it again, over and over. Of course, she was the reason the patch had color. She looked up as the tailor approached. She didn't seem surprised. No one ever was. People in forgotten worlds had a talent for accepting strange visitors without questions. They were already dealing with enough. "You're late," she said. "Everyone says that," the tailor replied mildly. "Usually right before asking me for something unreasonable." She smiled faintly. "Good. That means you're the right one." Her name was Elira Vale, and yes, the city had been named after her family, which was not as flattering as it sounded. The Vales had built Valistep centuries ago, convinced that progress required elevation. Every generation added more stairs, more levels, more expectations. Elira had inherited the tradition along with an impossible responsibility. She was the city recorder. Her job was to document every ascent, every promotion, every rise in status, every climb that mattered. The problem was that no one recorded the falls, or the pauses, or the people who stopped halfway and quietly decided they'd had enough. History, as always, was selective. Elira had noticed the gaps first. Names missing from records, entire families disappearing between levels. She had asked questions. That had gone poorly. She had kept asking anyway. That had gone worse. The city didn't exile her. That would have looked bad. Instead, they gave her more work, endless work. They buried her in records until she barely slept. Of course they did. Valistep preferred exhaustion over honesty. She began writing names that weren't officially recognized. People who never reached the top. People who chose not to climb. People who fell and weren't supposed to be remembered. And the moon noticed. It always did. "That's when the dark spots started," Elira said, gesturing upward. "I didn't know it was connected. I just knew something was listening." The tailor nodded, stitching carefully as the memory played around them. The patch glowed softly with each name Elira spoke aloud. The moon absorbed them gently, like it had been waiting. Romance had found Elira too, of course. It always did, usually at the worst possible moment. His name was Thomas, a stair builder. Quiet, practical. He repaired what others rushed past. They met on a landing no one used anymore. He listened to her theories without laughing, which, frankly, was enough. They planned a life that involved fewer stairs. Valistep did not approve. Thomas fell. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, everyone knew better. Elira kept writing his name anyway, over and over. She carved it into railings, whispered it into stone. The city tried to erase him. The moon refused. The dark patch formed the night she climbed to the very top and screamed every forgotten name into the cold air. Her voice broke. The moon cracked slightly. No one slept well after that. And then, the tailor asked softly. Elira shrugged. Then I kept going, because someone had to. The stitch closed. The city faded. The tailor stood once more on the moon, the patch now fully sewn. It pulsed gently, warm with memory. The moon seemed lighter, not brighter, lighter, like a burden had been set down. Elira remained behind, her story folded safely into the lunar fabric. She would be remembered now, not celebrated, just remembered, which was enough. The tailor packed his tools. His joints ached. Of course they did. Stitching history into celestial rock wasn't easy on the knees. As he descended the ladder, he glanced back. More dark spots waited. And somewhere below, autumn leaves continued to fall, carrying names with them. Let's drift onward. Next. All right, continuing the Tailor of the Moon, in the same sleepy, gentle tone. If you've just returned, welcome again. If you never left, that's probably better. When we last drifted off together, the old tailor had finished his first stitch on the moon. It was a neat stitch, small, careful, the kind of stitch that knows it shouldn't show off. Of course, the moon didn't thank him. The moon never did. It simply turned a fraction brighter, like it was pretending nothing had happened. The tailor sat on his ladder and waited. He always waited after a stitch. You had to. Stories don't like to be rushed. They prefer to stretch, like cats or old kings in uncomfortable chairs. The second dark patch revealed itself slowly, not dramatic. No sudden tear in the sky. Just a gentle thinning of moonlight, like fabric worn soft by time. The tailor sighed. Of course there was another one. There was always another one. He reached into his wooden box and pulled out a different thread this time. This one was pale grey. The colour of fog that had once been a city, the colour of stone steps polished smooth by generations of indecision. He threaded the needle with hands that remembered more than his mind ever could. And as the needle pierced the moon, the second story opened. There was once a city where no one sat down. Not because they weren't tired, they were exhausted, but sitting had faded. No one remembered when it happened exactly. It just became easier to stay standing and harder to stop. The city was called Varanth, though no one bothered saying it out loud anymore. Names, after all, have a habit of anchoring things. And this city preferred to drift. People slept standing up, leaning against walls, tied loosely to posts, balanced with the skill of those who had no choice but to adapt. Children learned to nap mid-conversation. Adults learned to dream without closing their eyes. And the royalty? Oh yes, there were royals. Of course there were. King Halvrik the Patient ruled Varanth for 47 years. He was called the patient because he never moved, literally. He stood in the throne hall from the day of his coronation until the day his legs simply forgot what they were for. No one noticed at first. Courtiers came and went. Petitions were made. Decisions were delayed, as royal decisions so often are. King Halvrik stared ahead, hands folded, eyes open, perfectly awake, perfectly asleep. They said he dreamed of chairs, soft ones, wide ones, the kind no one had seen in generations. The kingdom functioned around him. It always does. A council formed, then another council to advise the first council, then a third council to argue quietly about whether the king was still technically alive. Romance still happened in Varanth, of course. People fell in love standing side by side, sometimes literally. It was efficient. Couples leaned into each other at night, tied together loosely with ribbons or rope. They whispered plans of sitting down someday, together. Autumn was the hardest season. Leaves fell. People did not. The city smelled like dry stone and regret, like something that once rested and no longer remembered how. The queen, Elenia, had been a dancer before marriage. She was famous for never standing still. Naturally, she became the queen of a city that could not sit. Irony loves a crown. She tried everything. Chairs were reintroduced. Benches were placed on every street. Thrones were redesigned. No one could use them. Their legs shook. Their balance faltered. Sitting felt like falling, and falling was terrifying. One night, Queen Elenia stood alone in the palace gallery and whispered to the moon. She didn't expect an answer. No one ever does. But somewhere above, an old tailor felt the pull of that whisper tug at a loose thread. The needle slipped through moonlight. The tailor's hands moved slowly now. He remembered Varanth. He remembered standing beside a woman who dreamed of rest. He remembered promising things he could never quite deliver. Because dreams don't always come true. Sometimes they just get archived. The stitch closed. The moon brightened again. In Varanth, somewhere deep in the city's memory, a chair creaked. Just once. No one noticed. But the idea of sitting returned. Quietly. Patiently. The tailor tied off the thread and leaned back. 2 stitches done. Dozens left. He checked his box. There were threads for laughter. Threads for grief. Threads that shimmered like first love, and threads that smelled faintly of old paper and disappointment. Every patch had a story. Every story had once mattered enough to stain the moon. He climbed down the ladder slowly. His knees complained. Of course they did. Autumn wind brushed past him, carrying the faintest sound of leaves. And footsteps. Someone was walking on the clouds below. The tailor paused. That was new. And for the first time in a very long while, he wondered whether this next stitch would be one he remembered, or one that would remember him. He closed the box and waited for the moon to show him where to begin again. The button that remembered autumn. Nothing urgent is happening. The moon is still up there, doing its quiet job of glowing. And the tailor is still awake, because of course he is. By the time we find him tonight, The old tailor has moved from the western edge of the moon to a softer place near its lower curve. The light here is gentler, a little more forgiving. Like the moon itself has decided not to judge anyone for their life choices, which is nice, rare even. He sits cross-legged on a pale ridge of lunar dust, his coat folded neatly beside him. The needle rests between his fingers, warm as if it has opinions. The thread, thin and silver, lies coiled like a patient thought. He exhales, slowly. He always exhales before choosing the next stitch. This dark spot is small, almost polite, the kind of flaw that tries not to draw attention to itself. But the tailor knows better. Small darknesses are usually the loudest. He reaches into the pocket sewn inside his coat. The one that never empties, the one that smells faintly of old paper and rain. His fingers brush past things that do not belong together. Keys with no locks, ribbons that hum softly, a folded map of a city that no longer exists. And then he finds it. A button, wooden, round, warm to the touch. He pauses. Buttons are rare patches. Buttons are dangerous. Buttons are memories that refuse to lie flat. This one, he murmurs, to no one in particular, because the moon doesn't answer questions. It only listens. He threads the button carefully. Each hole glows faintly as the thread passes through, like tiny windows opening. And as the first stitch tightens, the story begins to leak out. It smells like autumn. Not the dramatic kind, not storms or dying leaves in grand gestures. This is the quiet autumn, the one that sneaks in early mornings, the one that settles into coats and kitchens and old routines. We are no longer on the moon. We are in a small town where the leaves fall politely, as if they were raised well. The town has a name, once, but no one remembers it now. Names fade faster than buildings, faster than people, faster even than regrets. There is a woman here. She wears a shawl she has mended too many times. Her hands are steady, her heart less so. She owns a shop that sells nothing anyone needs, but everything people miss. Buttons, thread, needles, small repairs for quiet lives. She hums while she works, always the same tune. A romance she never finished, a song that ends before the happy part because she never learned how it goes. Of course she didn't. She waits for someone. She has been waiting for years. The town knows this about her. Towns always know these things. They gossip in the way doors creak and clocks hesitate. Every autumn, she watches the road. Every autumn, she tells herself this will be the last time. And every autumn, she lies, gently, kindly, the way people do when they don't want to break themselves. The button on the moon tightens with another stitch. The memory deepens. There was a man once. Of course there was. He promised to return before the leaves fell, because promises always involve leaves for some reason. He said it casually, carelessly, as if autumn were guaranteed, as if time had manners. He left with a smile that suggested he didn't understand what he was leaving behind. He was handsome, technically, in the way men are when they don't yet know they will disappoint someone. He kissed her forehead, not her lips, which, in hindsight, explains a lot. She waited. Autumn came. Autumn stayed. The man did not. The tailor feels the weight of the story tug at his fingers. He adjusts the thread, slower now, more careful. He has sown heartbreak before, many times. He never rushes it. Back in the town, years pass quietly. No dramatic collapse, no tragic illness, just waiting and mending. And autumn after autumn, the woman grows older. Not bitter, just thinner around the eyes. One day, she finds a button in the pocket of a coat left behind at her shop. A simple wooden button. Warm, familiar, impossible. She does not remember where it came from, but she keeps it. Buttons, after all, are small anchors. She sews it onto her shawl, right over her heart. The stitch is imperfect. She doesn't care. From then on, the waiting changes. It becomes softer, less sharp. She still looks at the road, but she also looks at the trees, at the sky, at the way the light slants differently each autumn afternoon. She begins to hum louder. The song grows an ending. On the moon, the tailor finishes the final stitch. He presses the button gently. The dark spot beneath it fades, not erased, but eased, like a scar that no longer hurts when it rains. He leans back. Buttons always take more out of him. He closes his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. He allows himself to feel the romance of it, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't demand anything back. Autumn suits you, he says to the moon, because it does. The light is warmer now, softer around the edges. The needle cools in his hand. He slips the remaining thread back into his pocket. The button is secure. The memory settled. Somewhere, in a forgotten town, a woman no longer waits with pain, only with memory. And that, sometimes, is enough. The tailor stands. His joints complain, because of course they do. He glances across the moon's surface, already noticing the next dark place. Larger, deeper, more complicated, he sighs. Well, he says, calmly, tiredly, let's see what you're hiding. And with that, he walks on. By now, the tailor had grown used to the rhythm of the moon, not the poetic kind people wrote songs about, the practical kind, the slow rise, the soft dip, the way its light thickened like honey in autumn and thinned again by morning. He stitched while the world slept. His fingers moved the way old kings used to make decisions, slowly, carefully, and usually too late for anyone to complain. Each stitch was neat. Each knot was tiny. He had learned long ago that the moon disliked messiness. It tolerated tragedy. It tolerated romance. But loose threads annoyed it deeply. This particular night felt heavier. The patch he worked on wasn't large, but it resisted him. The fabric, mooncloth, pale and faintly warm, kept pulling away from the needle, as if the dark beneath it didn't want to be covered yet. Of course it didn't. Darkness never volunteered to leave. He sighed. A soft sound, the kind of sigh men make when they have outlived everyone who once argued with them. As the needle pierced through, The dark opened again. Another story slipped out. This one arrived with a smell. Old paper, rain, leaves pressed flat inside books and forgotten for decades. The tailor paused, holding the needle mid-air. "Autumn again?" he murmured, because of course it was. The story unfolded gently, like a curtain being pulled aside by someone who didn't want to wake the audience. It was a kingdom built around a library, not metaphorically, literally. Stone towers rose like bookmarks. Bridges curved like bent spines. Roofs were tiled in shades of copper and brown, the colors of fallen leaves and abandoned thoughts. The library had been there first. Everything else came later, as things often do. At the center lived a queen who never ruled. She wore a crown because tradition insisted. She sat on a throne because furniture had expectations. But her real home was a reading desk by a tall window where autumn light pooled like tea. Her name had been forgotten. Naturally, she was remembered instead as the listener. People came to her not with problems, but with stories they no longer wanted to carry. Regrets, half-finished romances, ambitions that had outlived their usefulness. She listened. She always listened. And somehow, the kingdom stayed peaceful, which should have been suspicious. The tailor stitched slowly as the tale continued. The queen never married. This upset everyone except her. Courts filled with suitors, handsome ones, tragic ones, ambitious ones, and one who cried a lot. But she declined them all with the same gentle smile. "I'm already spoken for," she would say. No one knew what she meant. Everyone pretended to. Autumn after autumn passed. The library grew. So did the silence. People noticed something odd. When citizens stopped telling their stories, they began to fade. Not die. Just thin. Their voices softened. Their footsteps made less sound. Eventually, they became part of the library itself. Ink in margins, whispers in pages, shadows between shelves. The queen noticed. Of course she did. She called for advisors. They arrived late and nervous. "This isn't sustainable," one said, because that's what advisors say when they don't know what else to say. The queen nodded. "Yes," she agreed. "It never is." She closed the library. That was her mistake. The kingdom didn't know what to do with untold stories. They piled up like unwashed dishes. They spoiled. They turned bitter. Romance curdled into resentment. Magic became brittle. Autumn lingered too long, refusing to become winter. The moon above developed its first dark spot that season. The tailor felt the thread tighten beneath his fingers. He remembered that spot. He had patched it once before, long ago. Back in the story, the queen walked alone through the closed library. Books rattled softly. Shelves creaked like tired knees. The silence pressed close. She reached the center desk and sat. And for the first time, she spoke her own story aloud. She spoke of loving the kingdom more than any one person, of choosing listening over being heard, of fear, quiet, unglamorous fear, that if she spoke too much, she would disappear too. The library listened. The books exhaled. The people returned. But the queen didn't. She faded into the last book she touched, becoming a footnote in her own kingdom, a gentle one, a necessary one. The story ended the way all moon stories do, softly, without applause. The dark closed. The tailor finished the stitch and tied it off. He leaned back, flexing his fingers. They ached pleasantly, like they had done something useful. Below him, the world slept. Dreamers shifted. Some remembered libraries. Some remembered queens whose names they never knew. The moon glowed steadier now. "Still mending," the tailor said quietly, to both of us. He reached for the next patch, because the night was long, and the moon, like history, was never finished. The patch made of autumn letters. By the time the tailor reached the sixth dark place on the moon, he had learned a few things. One was that the moon did not like to be rushed. Another was that every patch had an opinion. And the third was that memory, when stitched poorly, tended to unravel at the worst possible moment. This particular dark spot sat low on the moon's western curve, where the light thinned like old fabric rubbed smooth by centuries of fingers. The tailor squinted at it, not because it was large, but because it felt personal. Of course it did. Everything eventually was. He unpacked his thread slowly. Tonight's thread was not silver or cloud-spun or borrowed from comets. It was brown and amber, and the color of dried leaves pressed between forgotten pages. Autumn thread, the kind that smelled faintly of apples and rain and libraries that had once been warm. The moon hummed, a low sound, like approval mixed with mild concern. "Relax," the tailor murmured. "I've done this before. Several times, actually. You just don't remember, which is fair." As he stitched, letters began to appear inside the patch. Not words, just letters. Loose, drifting characters, as if someone had spilled an alphabet and wandered away. They rearranged themselves constantly, never settling, never spelling anything fully legible. This was the patch of names unsent. Every world had one. When the final stitch tightened, the story opened. It began in a valley that only knew autumn. No spring, no summer, no winter. Just a permanent golden in-between. Trees stood eternally mid-shed, leaves hovering like they were unsure whether falling was still required. In the valley lived a woman named Elira, who wrote letters she never sent. She wrote to her mother, long gone, about the weather. She wrote to lovers she had not quite loved enough. She wrote to a king she once refused, which had turned out to be a surprisingly political decision. Of course it had. Elira worked as a registrar of names. Every child born in the valley had their name recorded by her hand, using ink distilled from fallen leaves. She took this seriously. Too seriously, according to some. But names, she believed, were small spells. And spells, as everyone knows, deserve proper penmanship. Her tragedy was simple, almost boring, which is the saddest kind. Elira loved someone whose name she never learned. They met at the edge of the valley where the trees thinned and the sky widened. He came from a place where seasons moved properly, which already made him suspicious. They spoke for hours, days, weeks, always at the border, never crossing. She asked him everything except his name. He never volunteered it. Romantic, yes. Practical, no. Predictable disaster, absolutely. When he finally left, he promised to write. She waited. She wrote letters instead, hundreds of them. They filled drawers, boxes, rooms. Eventually, they filled the valley itself. Leaves on trees began to curl into letters. Wind rearranged branches into sentences that almost made sense. The valley could not sleep. Autumn stalled. Time slowed. Babies were born and named and grew old without ever seeing another season. The sky dimmed, embarrassed, and then, one night, Elira realized the problem. Of course she did. She always did, eventually. She had written everything except the one thing that mattered. His name. Names, as it turns out, anchor memory. Without them, longing drifts. It becomes weather. It becomes a season that refuses to move on. Elira gathered every letter she had written and carried them to the center of the valley. She burned them slowly, one by one, releasing words into smoke. The valley inhaled. When the last letter turned to ash, winter arrived for the first time. It was brief, gentle, necessary. Spring followed, then summer, then autumn again, this time honestly. Elira aged. She kept writing, but differently now. Shorter letters, kinder ones. Some she sent, some she didn't. She learned that closure was not a door you closed. It was a window you stopped leaning out of. When she died, the valley buried her under a tree that finally let its leaves fall. The story closed. The tailor exhaled slowly. "That one always hurts," he said, even though this was technically the first time he had watched it, or the 100th. Time around the moon was unreliable like that. The patch settled. The letters faded, leaving behind a smooth amber glow. The moon brightened slightly, grateful but quiet. The tailor packed away his autumn thread. He rubbed his hands together, warming them. "All right," he said softly. "Let's float over to another old problem." Above him, a new dark spot shimmered into view. Larger this time, deeper. The kind of darkness that suggested not absence, but accumulation. The moon sighed, and somewhere far below, on a world that still believed night was optional, someone dreamed of sowing light back into the sky. The tailor adjusted his coat. He had work to do. By the time the tailor realized the moon had changed again, autumn had arrived quietly on Earth. Not the dramatic kind of autumn with screaming winds and crunching leaves everywhere. This was the soft version, the kind where the air smells faintly like apples, the kind where trees don't rush to let go. They just consider it. The tailor noticed it first in his hands. They moved slower now, not weaker, just thoughtful. Each stitch took a moment longer, as if the needle itself wanted to remember what it was doing before passing through the moon's pale skin. He sat on his narrow wooden stool, floating just above the lunar surface, legs dangling slightly, like a man fishing from the edge of the sky. And as he stitched, the moon whispered again. Not loudly. It never did. It spoke the way old buildings speak when they settle at night. Soft, patient, a little creaky. The tailor had learned not to answer right away. That was important. If you answered too quickly, the moon would tell you a story you weren't ready to hear. And those stories tended to linger. Instead, he stitched, slowly, carefully, with thread that shimmered like frost caught in early morning light. This patch was different. It wasn't repairing a scar from war or grief or forgotten love. This dark place was round, perfectly round, like a missing eye. The moon hesitated as the needle approached. "Oh," the tailor murmured, "that sort of story." The moon did not deny it. This patch opened into a kingdom that once believed it could outgrow the night. They had lamps that never dimmed, cities designed without shadows, children who grew up never knowing what fear looked like when it closed its eyes. At first, it worked. Of course it did. It always does. People slept less. They worked more. They built faster. And they forgot something important. Night is not the enemy of light. It's the place where light learns to rest. Without darkness, dreams grew thin. People stopped remembering things that mattered. Romance became transactional. Magic became theoretical. Eventually, the lamps began to flicker. And when darkness returned, suddenly, all at once, no one knew how to hold it. The kingdom collapsed quietly. No great catastrophe, no screaming, just a slow forgetting. The tailor stitched gently, his fingers aching in a way that felt familiar now. "You tried to protect them," he said to the moon. The moon said nothing. It never argues. It only remembers. Below them, earth drifted on, wrapped in autumn colors. The tailor could see forests turning copper, rivers slowing down, people pulling blankets just a little higher at night. He smiled. Autumn was always honest. When the patch was finished, the round darkness softened. It no longer looked like an empty place. It looked like a closed eye, finally resting. The moon exhaled. And somewhere, far below, someone dreamed of a city where night was kind. The tailor gathered his tools. He knew what came next. Another story, another scar, another forgotten world knocking softly from the dark. He adjusted his coat, pulled it tighter against the quiet cold, and waited, because the moon always remembers where it hurts. And the tailor was still listening. By the time the tailor realized the moon was listening to him, autumn had fully settled into the world below. You could tell by the color of the light. Moonlight, when autumn arrives, changes its mood. It grows warmer, less silver, more amber. Like a candle someone forgot to blow out. The tailor noticed it one quiet night while threading his needle. The moon hung lower than usual, almost as if it were trying to read over his shoulder. Of course it was. The moon had always been curious. It just usually pretended not to be. "Don't stare," the tailor muttered, adjusting his spectacles. "It makes the stitches nervous." The moon did not blink, because moons do not blink. They simply hover, judging you silently. He began another patch. This one was small, barely larger than a button. A dark freckle near the moon's edge where shadows like to collect and gossip. He pressed the cloth against the surface, felt the familiar hum beneath his fingertips, and began to sew. As the needle passed through, the story opened. Not all stories burst forth dramatically. Some simply exhale. This one drifted out like breath on a cold evening. It was the story of a forgotten princess, which, honestly, described most princesses once time was finished with them. She had lived in a kingdom that no longer appeared on maps. The sort of kingdom that had once been very proud of its walls, its banners, and its unnecessarily complicated family tree. They were very fond of marrying cousins, because of course they were. The princess was named Elowen, or maybe Eloeth. Names tended to blur after a few centuries. She had been born under an autumn moon, which everyone immediately decided meant something very important. It usually did not. She was quiet, thoughtful, not particularly interested in ruling, marrying, or participating in court intrigue. This disappointed everyone. Instead, she liked to walk the palace gardens at night and talk to the moon. She told it about her worries, about her boredom, about how everyone expected her to be something sharp and shining when she felt more like a half-finished thought. The moon listened. It always did. Eventually, the kingdom arranged her marriage to a prince from a neighboring land. He was called the Gentle, which historically meant he cried a lot and had opinions about poetry. He was fine, perfectly fine. That was the problem. Elowen did not hate him. She simply felt nothing. On the night before the wedding, she went to the garden one last time. She told the moon she was tired of expectations, tired of living someone else's idea of a meaningful life. The moon, being the moon, offered no advice. It only reflected her face back to her, pale, thoughtful, already fading into memory. The next morning, Elowen was gone. No footprints, no letters, no dramatic escape scene involving horses, just absence. The kingdom searched, naturally, then slowly stopped, naturally. Centuries later, the moon still remembered her. That memory had become a dark spot, a small one, easily overlooked, but heavy. The tailor finished the stitch and tied it off neatly. "There," he said softly, "you don't have to carry that alone anymore." The moon's light softened just a little. The tailor leaned back in his chair, stretching his hands. They ached. They always did. Sewing cosmic sorrow was not easy on the joints. He poured himself a cup of tea. It tasted faintly of smoke and dried apples. Autumn flavors. He approved. As he sipped, he noticed something unusual. A movement on the moon's surface. Not a story, not a memory. A shape. A silhouette stood near one of the patched places. Tall, human, watching him. The tailor froze. This had never happened before. Stories came out of the moon. People did not stand on it. He lowered his cup slowly. "Well," he said after a moment, because silence made him nervous. "That's new." The figure raised an arm and waved. The tailor sighed. "Of course you did," he muttered to the moon. "Of course you let someone wander in." He set down his tea, reached for his needle, and stood. Because when you spend your life mending the moon, you eventually accept one simple truth. Every stitch leads somewhere, and some stories, once opened, decide to walk back out. The moon's light flickered, autumn leaves rustled below, and the tailor prepared to meet the next forgotten thing. As the moon hung low that evening, gilded in a gentle autumn glow, the tailor continued his meticulous work. Each stitch hummed softly, a sound like the rustle of dry leaves in a forgotten forest. It was said that when the tailor stitched, he didn't just repair the moon, he repaired the stories trapped in the shadows it cast. One particular stitch opened a patch that shimmered differently, more vivid, more alive. From it emerged a delicate scene of a city entirely suspended in starlight, where the buildings seemed woven from threads of silver and pale gold. The tailor squinted through his spectacles. Of course he did. These weren't ordinary stitches. Some threads demanded careful observation, like a puzzle whispered by an old friend who forgot their own name. Within this city, tiny beings moved about their evenings. There was a baker with a hat too large for his head, a musician whose violin strings glowed faintly, and a young child chasing sparks that seemed too bright for such a dark sky. The tailor smiled softly, not because it was amusing, but because these fragments of forgotten worlds were so achingly familiar. They reminded him of every quiet autumn evening he had ever spent listening to the wind, wondering if anyone else remembered such small, magical moments. He adjusted another stitch, and suddenly the scene changed. Now the city had fallen under a soft snowfall of luminous petals that descended in spirals. Each petal held a memory, a first kiss on a bridge, a secret whispered into the wind, a letter never sent but folded neatly in a pocket. The tailor paused. He wondered if any of these tiny, dreamlike beings could feel the weight of such moments. Of course they could. They were stitched from the same cloth as the memories themselves. A faint creak in the floorboard reminded the tailor that he was still in his modest attic workshop, the one where dust motes floated lazily in the light of his lantern. Yet, the moon outside seemed fuller than it had been in decades. He looked up and chuckled softly, though there was a hint of melancholy in it, because of course the moon would not simply wait for anyone. It had its own rhythm, its own whims, like a patient yet capricious friend who occasionally offered glimpses into the worlds it had seen. He picked up the silver needle again. The next stitch opened a window into a forest, dark but not menacing, illuminated by glowing fungi and phosphorescent streams. Here, a fox with a coat like spun starlight wandered among trees with amber leaves. He followed the fox as it paused to look at him, its eyes reflecting centuries of untold tales. The fox disappeared behind a moss-covered trunk, and the tailor felt an odd warmth in his chest. Somehow, even this small, enchanted being seemed aware that he was there, repairing, remembering, stitching. The tailor worked through the night, guided by the soft, silvery glow of his lantern and the moon. Outside, the wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of autumn woodpecker and distant rain. Each stitch hummed, echoing faintly in the room as if the threads themselves were alive. He found himself laughing quietly, because why not? After all, repairing the moon was serious work. But it had the most peculiar habit of reminding one that even the smallest, quietest stories mattered. By the time the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon with pale gold, the tailor had almost completed the moon's patches for the night. One final stitch remained, and as he pulled the silver thread through, a familiar warmth spread across his hands. The last patch revealed a small village beneath the moon, its inhabitants moving through quiet streets lined with amber lanterns. Here, he saw reflections of his own life, fragmented yet vivid, stitched into the larger tapestry of the world. He leaned back, exhausted but fulfilled, watching the moon glow steadily in the morning sky. The magic wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, gentle, and persistent, just like the tailor himself. With a soft sigh, he lowered his needle, folded his hands, and allowed the stories to linger a little longer before the waking world claimed him again. And as the sun rose, the tailor whispered to himself, "Tomorrow we stitch again." Because, of course, the moon never stays whole for long, and neither do the stories it carries. The morning light filtered softly through the small attic window, dust motes dancing like tiny stars caught in amber. The tailor yawned and stretched, his old bones reminding him that nights spent stitching celestial fabrics were not for the faint of heart or the young of joint. But he smiled anyway, because, of course, he was the sort of person who could spend hours conversing with threads and moonlight, and somehow not feel entirely ridiculous doing so. He brewed a small pot of tea, letting the fragrant steam curl lazily around his fingers. Each sip felt like a warm stitch of its own, knitting comfort into his tired muscles. Outside, the moon still lingered in the fading night sky, pale and patched in its renewed glory. But the tailor knew it would not rest long. The moon had an appetite for stories, and there were always new ones waiting to be uncovered, hidden in the dark spots, in the shadows it carried across the earth. Returning to his workbench, he carefully laid out threads of silver, gold, and sometimes a faint glimmer that seemed almost impossible to describe. He had learned, over decades of moon mending, that not all stitches were simple. Some required patience, some required humor, and a few demanded a gentle conversation with the universe itself. He chuckled quietly. Of course, he was the sort of man who talked to the moon while sewing it back together. The first patch of the night revealed a hidden cove where tiny boats floated as if suspended in clouds, their sails stitched from soft, shimmering silk. Children played along the water's edge, laughing silently, chasing reflections of forgotten stars. The tailor noticed a boy pause to toss a pebble into the shimmering tide, and with that small action, an entire story unfolded. A story of hope, loss, and a promise kept across lifetimes. The tailor threaded his needle carefully, honoring the delicate fragility of it all. A flicker in the lantern drew his gaze. Perhaps it was only a firefly, or perhaps it was a remnant of a story that had wandered from a stitched moonbeam into his room. Either way, It reminded him that magic was everywhere, even in the most mundane corners of life. He whispered to himself, "If the stars can forgive my mistakes, so can I," and laughed softly at the irony. After all, who else could argue with a celestial body about patching up its flaws? As the night deepened, he worked through scenes of forests lit by phosphorescent fungi, of tiny villages tucked in clouds, and of ancient libraries where whispers of forgotten knowledge lingered like mist. Each stitch brought a memory, a secret, or a small miracle to life. The tailor realized, with a quiet satisfaction, that repairing the moon was less about fixing an orb in the sky and more about preserving the stories it held. At one point, he paused and leaned back, observing a particularly vibrant patch. It showed a pair of lovers seated on a bench beneath a tree, whose leaves glowed with autumnal fire. Their hands hovered over each other, hesitant yet certain, caught in the fragile magic of early romance. The tailor smiled knowingly. He had seen many stories of love, some tragic, some joyous, but this one was gentle, quiet, and perfectly imperfect, just like the moon itself. Hours slipped by, measured not by clocks but by the subtle shifts in moonlight. The tailor occasionally hummed, a tune that seemed to echo from the threads themselves, soft and melancholic. Somewhere deep in the attic, a clock ticked, though it felt more like a distant heartbeat than a measure of time. With each stitch, he felt the weight of centuries, the ebb and flow of lives he would never meet, yet whose echoes he carried in his needle. The final patch of this session revealed a field of floating lanterns drifting upward into the night sky. Each lantern held a memory, a wish not spoken aloud, a story not yet told, a song nearly forgotten. The tailor's hands shook slightly as he completed the stitch. He knew that for a brief moment he had preserved something fragile and eternal, even if no one would ever see it. Of course, he smiled quietly. What was a moon without a patch of mystery, a hint of magic, and just a touch of romance? As dawn threatened the horizon, the tailor put down his needle. The moon gleamed, stitched, and alive in ways few could comprehend. He folded his hands and let his gaze linger, thinking of all the worlds he had glimpsed, the lives he had touched without ever meeting them, the stories now suspended in silver and light. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Tomorrow we stitch again." And the moon seemed to shimmer in agreement, a quiet companion in the endless work of repairing the dark, one story at a time. The sunlight was hesitant as it crept through the attic window, brushing against the tailor's workbench. He yawned, long and deliberate, stretching his arms with the kind of slow motion that only comes from decades of moonlit labor. He had learned that mornings in the attic were quieter than the nights. The world outside moved quickly, unbothered by threads of silver and forgotten dreams. But inside this little sanctuary, time bent with patience and purpose. The tailor brewed another pot of tea, inhaling the faint scent of chamomile mixed with dust and something unnameable, perhaps the aroma of stories waiting to be stitched. He poured it into his favorite chipped cup, the one with a small crescent moon painted near the rim, and for a moment simply held it, letting warmth seep into his hands. He smiled, because of course he was the sort of man who found delight in small rituals, even when they seemed trivial to anyone else. He returned to the moon, now hanging low and still luminous in the early sky, patched with fragments of countless tales. There was a small tear near its southern edge, where the darkness seemed to pool like ink. The tailor approached carefully, selecting threads of pale lavender and soft gold. Each stitch required attention, but also a kind of imagination, a gentle weaving of what was lost with what might yet be. Tonight, the patches revealed more than landscapes or lovers. They revealed history, tiny histories tucked inside shadows. One showed a marketplace in a hidden village where merchants sold glowing orbs that contained forgotten melodies. Children wandered through the stalls, their laughter nearly silent, yet their joy left visible ripples in the air. The tailor watched, threading the needles slowly, and whispered, "If this world can hear them, perhaps it can remember itself." The next patch glimmered with the image of a vast forest, where the trees themselves whispered secrets to travelers who dared to wander under their boughs. Leaves shimmered with silver veins, catching the moonlight in ways that suggested magic without overt demonstration. A small fox trotted along a winding path, carrying a tiny lantern in its mouth. The tailor chuckled softly. Of course he was entertained by tiny lantern-carrying foxes. He had seen stranger things, yes, but the delicate absurdity of this one warmed him. As he stitched, he discovered a hidden narrative of forgotten friendship. Two figures met beneath a bridge of moonlight, exchanging stories they could no longer tell aloud. Their hands brushed over the cool stones, and the tailor felt a pang of melancholy, for he understood that some stories, once lost, could only be briefly revisited in moments like this. He threaded his needle with care, honoring the transient magic of connection. Hours passed with the quiet rhythm of sewing and whispered observation. He worked through miniature cities suspended in clouds, gentle rivers flowing upward instead of down, and libraries where books turned themselves with invisible hands. Each stitch illuminated another hidden life, another secret memory, and the tailor marveled at the complexity of it all. The moon, he realized, was not merely an orb in the sky. It was a mirror, reflecting what humanity forgot or neglected, hidden in darkness yet shining when stitched carefully. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Somewhere in the shadow of the attic, a small bell chimed, not loudly, but with deliberate resonance. Perhaps it was a visitor, or perhaps it was another story nudging its way through the stitches into the physical world. The tailor smiled knowingly. He had learned to expect the unexpected. After all, the moon was not predictable, nor were the worlds it cradled. The final patch of this session glowed softly. It depicted a lone traveler standing at the edge of a cliff, staring at an endless horizon of stars. Behind them, a small lantern floated, containing the memory of a long-lost song. The tailor felt the familiar swell of satisfaction that came when a story had been respected, even if only for a few moments. He stitched carefully, leaving nothing undone, and stepped back to admire his work. By the time dawn fully arrived, the moon hung quietly, its dark spots patched with soft light. The attic smelled of tea, thread, and faint magic. The tailor rested for a moment, sipping the last of his cup and listening to the quiet hum of stitched worlds. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we stitch again." The moon seemed to shimmer in agreement, as if nodding to a friend who understood patience, stories, and the delicate art of repairing the night. The morning sun cast a pale glow through the attic window, catching the silver threads left from last night's work. The tailor stirred slowly, as if the day itself moved too quickly and required gentle coaxing. He took a deep breath, letting the scent of tea, dust, and forgotten dreams settle in his lungs, grounding him for the hours ahead. The moon still hung low, an ever-watchful companion, waiting patiently for the tailor's return. Its patches shimmered faintly, reflecting the stitched stories of nights past. The tailor approached with quiet reverence, choosing his threads carefully. Tonight, the colors were richer: indigo, soft amethyst, and threads that shimmered like the first frost on autumn leaves. Each stitch demanded attention, yet promised discovery, a dance of patience and imagination. As the needle pierced the lunar surface, the first scene unfolded. A small village, perched on cliffs above a calm sea, revealed villagers preparing for a festival. Lanterns floated gently in the sky, their light catching the whispers of music carried on the breeze. Children ran barefoot through cobblestone streets, chasing shadows that seemed to have lives of their own. The tailor chuckled softly, shaking his head. Of course they danced with shadows. They had every right. Shadows were often more adventurous than their owners. A second patch emerged, revealing a hidden library built inside a hollowed mountain. Books flew like birds from shelf to shelf, opening themselves to reveal stories the world had nearly forgotten. A solitary scholar moved among them, his fingers brushing over spines, absorbing the quiet magic of knowledge without urgency. The tailor paused, threading a silver stitch through a tiny window in the library wall. "Even the smallest details matter," he whispered, because of course he believed in small miracles. Next came the forest of mirrors, where trees reflected not just physical shapes, but emotions. Travelers wandered among the trunks, confronting joys and sorrows, hopes and regrets. Each reflection shimmered and shifted, forming intricate patterns only visible to those who truly looked. A small fox, familiar and mischievous, darted through the undergrowth, leaving trails of stardust behind. The tailor smiled, recognizing that magic often arrived in the smallest forms, subtle yet profound. As he stitched, he noticed a recurring motif: a bridge made entirely of moonlight. Beneath it, waters flowed upward, carrying fragments of forgotten songs and memories too tender to recall in daylight. Figures crossed the bridge cautiously, carrying lanterns that illuminated their paths in golden hues. One traveler paused mid-bridge, lifting a small vial that glowed faintly with a captured sunset. The tailor's hands worked steadily, stitching each ripple of water and glint of light with care. knowing that even ephemeral moments deserved preservation. Hours passed unnoticed. The attic, bathed in soft morning light, felt timeless. Each patch revealed histories layered within histories, tales nested like Russian dolls. He witnessed romances whispered in shadowed corridors, quiet heroics of invisible hands, and laughter echoing across realms that never were, but somehow existed. The tailor hummed softly to himself, the thread moving in rhythm with the melodies of the stitched worlds. A sudden breeze stirred the attic curtains, bringing with it a faint scent of jasmine and salt water. The tailor paused, sensing a story arriving unbidden. A lone ship appeared on a moonlit sea, its sails catching the threads of silver stitched just last night. On board, a captain traced constellations with his fingers, mapping destinies only visible under this repaired lunar glow. The tailor added delicate stitches along the rigging, ensuring the stars and the ship harmonized, as if the sky itself approved of the arrangement. By the time dusk approached, the moon seemed to pulse faintly, as if sighing in contentment. Its surface was a tapestry of patched worlds, each thread a story, each stitch a memory given shape and light. The tailor leaned back, rubbing tired eyes, sipping the last of his tea. "Rest well, old friend," he murmured to the moon. "We have more stories waiting tonight." And in the quiet, stitched glow of the moon, the attic whispered back, promising new tales, adventures, and forgotten dreams ready to be sown into existence once more. Night draped itself over the attic, heavier this time, as if aware of the wonders that awaited. The tailor stretched his back slowly, the creak of joints mingling with the hush of the room. The moon, high and luminous, now bore the intricate tapestry of worlds stitched over countless nights. Each patch shimmered faintly, the stories pressing softly against its surface, waiting to breathe in the quiet hours. He selected a thread of deep sapphire tonight, one that caught the faint light like a droplet of water in a sunbeam. As the needle pierced the lunar surface, a new scene unfolded. A vast field of lantern flowers appeared, their petals open to the sky, glowing with a soft bioluminescence. Travelers wandered through, collecting blooms that hummed with gentle music. Every pluck of a petal released a memory, sweet and unclaimed. Drifting like smoke into the night, the tailor's fingers danced with care, aware that these moments were delicate, fleeting, yet eternal once stitched into the moon. Next came the city of falling leaves, a place where autumn never truly ended. Streets were lined with amber and crimson, leaves swirling perpetually in lazy spirals, whispering stories of long-ago lovers, of laughter and whispered secrets beneath the branches. People moved slowly, savoring each moment as if time itself had been slowed by enchantment. The tailor smiled, humming softly. Of course they lingered. When the world is this beautiful, who could hurry? From the corner of a patch emerged a small crooked tower built on stilts over a mirrored lake. Its windows reflected the clouds, as though the building existed between reality and imagination. Within, a painter worked, brush in hand, attempting to capture fleeting colors that changed each time he blinked. The tailor added tiny stitches to the tower's spire, catching reflections in silver thread so that even the moonlight seemed to bend around it. "Details matter," he whispered again, "because every story, no matter how small, deserved care." A sudden gust of wind from an unseen window lifted a pile of sketches from the tailor's table. They hovered for a heartbeat, as though alive, before spiraling into the newly stitched worlds. Some became birds, others drifting clouds, and one, most curiously, transformed into a tiny dragon with scales like molten gold. The creature perched delicately on the edge of a cloud patch, blinking at the tailor as if acknowledging the artistry of its creation. "Well, that's new," the tailor murmured, amused. The dragon stretched its wings, shimmering in the pale moonlight, and disappeared into the folds of stitched night, leaving trails of starlight. He then turned his attention to a distant patch depicting a village built entirely from books. Its rooftops were hard covers, windows, delicate glass panes inscribed with letters. Villagers moved between pages that served as streets, tracing the lines of prose with reverent fingers. Stories were alive here. Characters conversed in whispers, and legends leaned from corners to peek at the tailor's progress. He stitched carefully along the edges of the village, reinforcing pathways so the residents could wander safely, forever trapped in their literary existence. Hours flowed past unnoticed, the world outside the attic fading entirely. The tailor's work was rhythmic, meditative, like a heartbeat carried across the dark. A soft knocking echoed faintly, though no door existed on the moon. Curious, he reached toward it with the thread and needle, and in a shimmer of silver, a figure appeared. Not fully formed, like a dream still in progress, a traveler who had wandered through the moon's patched realms without knowing. Eyes wide, they paused at the edge of a stitched path, hesitant yet entranced. The tailor's heart stirred in an unexpected way. Encounters were rare in these nocturnal adventures. Visitors often arrived only when the stories were ready for someone else to notice them. "Ah," he whispered, "it seems tonight is not just about stitching." The visitor stepped forward tentatively, leaving faint footprints on patches that glowed faintly with their own light. Each step revealed memories of other worlds, and the tailor felt an unfamiliar thrill, a shared witness to the beauty he had been creating in solitude. They did not speak immediately. Words, after all, were unnecessary here. The moon's stitched stories hummed quietly between them, a silent symphony of creation and discovery. The tailor guided the visitor's gaze gently across the new patches, the lantern flower fields, the city of falling leaves, the mirrored tower, the village of books. Each scene shimmered in quiet magic, and the visitor's eyes reflected the depth of wonder, as if they had been waiting for this journey all along. By the time the attic clock chimed faintly from some hidden realm, the tailor and his guest had moved across countless stitched worlds. Stars hovered near, glowing faintly, attentive witnesses to their quiet exploration. The moon seemed to sigh in contentment, soft light spilling over the threads that held realms together. "Rest now," the tailor said, "more to the universe than to the visitor. We will continue tomorrow night." The figure nodded, fading into the silver light of a patch yet to be fully stitched. The tailor leaned back, hands aching but content, sipping tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the real world continued in oblivious rhythm, unaware of the wonders above, quietly patched together by an old tailor who stitched not just the moon, but the hearts of those willing to dream. The night wore on, thick and soft like velvet draped over the stars. The tailor's hands hovered above the moon, restless but careful, as though each thread could either mend or unravel the quiet magic of the stitched worlds. Tonight, he felt a subtle shift, a ripple across the luminous surface that hinted at new stories pressing to emerge. He inhaled deeply, the scent of aged wood and lavender tea lingering in the attic, and began to thread his needle with a silvery gold strand, one that glimmered faintly even in the dim light. The first patch he touched shimmered and bloomed into a scene of a forgotten carnival suspended in the clouds. Ferris wheels turned lazily, their carriages filled with creatures from stories long abandoned: winged cats, tiny humanoid fireflies, and storytellers whose eyes had forgotten the faces of those they loved. Music floated from unseen instruments, soft and undemanding, weaving into the hum of the moon's stitched surface. The tailor guided each note with delicate stitches, ensuring that the melody persisted, forever looping without hurry, allowing the visitor from last night to wander freely through its gentle magic. As he worked, the attic itself seemed to pulse with a kind of sleepy energy, as though the building had grown used to the tailor's nocturnal rituals. Shadows leaned lazily along the corners of shelves, merging with moonlight that spilled from patched cracks in the attic roof. From one corner emerged a miniature river, its waters flowing in silver threads, carrying tiny glass boats that bobbed gently. Each boat held a memory, a forgotten song, a tender moment, a quiet confession whispered in the dark. The tailor paused to watch, his hands steady, marveling at how even the smallest memories could shine so brilliantly when set free in the right light. The visitor from the previous night returned, now more confident, gliding across clouds as though they belonged there. They paused at the edge of the carnival, gazing at the creatures and the muted lights, reaching out to touch a carousel horse whose mane glowed with threads of moonlight. "Do you see it all?" the tailor asked softly, though his voice seemed more like a gentle wind across stitched leaves. The visitor nodded, eyes reflecting countless patches, each one alive with subtle magic. The tailor moved next to a more delicate patch, one that depicted a library without walls. Books floated freely, their pages humming with stories that had never been told. Some drifted lazily, others pirouetted gently, spinning narratives into the ether. The visitor reached for a particularly fragile tome, and as their fingers brushed the cover, a warm glow expanded, revealing a tale of an astronomer who had charted stars that didn't exist, mapping constellations of feeling rather than physics. The tailor's stitches shone faintly in response, binding the story to the moon so that it could be remembered even when the stars shifted. A faint giggle echoed somewhere between patches, a sound like wind chimes in a sunbeam. The tailor looked up, his brows knitting slightly, and saw a troop of tiny creatures emerging from the carnival clouds. They were made entirely of silver threads, shimmering like morning frost. Each carried a token, a fragment of a dream, a scrap of forgotten love, a memory of laughter. They circled the tailor and his visitor, weaving intricate patterns above the moon's surface, leaving trails of soft light in their wake. He laughed quietly to himself. Of course they were mischievous. Any world this quiet and suspended in magic needed a little chaos to feel alive. Then came the most unusual patch yet, a tower of mirrors, infinite and shifting. The visitor stepped closer, and the tailor followed, noticing that each reflection didn't quite match reality. Some showed who the viewer might have been, others who they could still become. The tailor added gentle stitches along the edges of each mirror, connecting them with threads of understanding, empathy, and quiet courage. Even reflections have stories, he murmured. Sometimes they tell more than reality ever could. The visitor reached out to touch their own reflection, and for a brief moment, the moon shimmered brighter, as though it approved of their quiet exploration. Hours passed unnoticed, the attic breathing with the rhythm of the stitched moon. The tailor worked tirelessly, each thread a lullaby, each patch a meditation. As dawn approached in some distant world, the first hints of pale light touched the highest clouds. The tailor leaned back, exhausted but serene. The visitor lingered, gazing at the infinite patches, a soft smile playing on their lips. "Will you return?" they asked. The tailor nodded, already imagining the wonders that tomorrow night would bring. More forgotten stories, more fragile memories, more quiet moments suspended between sleep and wakefulness. And so the tailor stitched on, the moon humming softly beneath his hands, a silent guardian of countless tales, waiting for the next night, the next visitor, the next breath of magic that would drift through his attic and into dreams. The attic was quieter tonight, if only slightly, as if the air itself had grown accustomed to the soft rhythm of the tailor's needle. Outside, the stars lingered like watchful companions, shimmering in a slow, unhurried cadence. The tailor, perched on his worn wooden stool, let his gaze drift across the moon's patched surface. Every stitch pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of silver and gold, echoing the tales that had been set free and those yet waiting patiently in the darkness. Tonight, the first patch he approached was a forest of glowing lanterns, their light filtering through clouds shaped like whispering animals. The lanterns weren't ordinary. Each contained a fragment of a forgotten dream. A moment when someone had laughed too quietly, a sigh caught between sentences, a memory of autumn leaves swirling beneath a lazy wind. As the tailor threaded the first needle, the lanterns flickered in response, casting soft patterns across the clouds. Tiny, shadowed figures moved between the lights, carefully balancing the delicate fragments. The visitor from previous nights wandered among them, fingertips brushing the gentle glow, and the tailor watched with quiet satisfaction. It was always this balance, letting stories breathe without forcing them, letting memories shine without overtaking the quiet magic. Next, A river appeared in the moon's patchwork, silver water winding like a slow ribbon across stitched clouds. On its surface floated letters, old and weathered, bound in tiny bows. The tailor carefully stitched around them, ensuring each letter remained afloat, unread but preserved. Some contained confessions, others apologies that had never reached their intended recipients, and a few were notes of unremarkable yet profoundly personal domestic moments. A spilled cup of tea, a child's forgotten drawing, a sigh at a window pane on a rainy morning. Each letter shimmered faintly when the needle passed, as though acknowledging the respect shown by the tailor's careful hands. Above the river, clouds shaped themselves into marketplaces, faintly reminiscent of towns long gone, where merchants sold intangible treasures. The visitor paused to observe a vendor offering bottled sunsets, each carefully layered with the colors of distant horizons. Another stall held music, notes floating in tiny glass jars, ready to be opened when someone needed them most. The tailor smiled softly, recognizing the tiny threads of magic binding each object, ensuring they remained gentle, ephemeral, and free from the clamor of everyday life. This was the sort of magic that thrived in stillness, in whispers, in the space between one breath and the next. The third patch tonight was a library, enormous yet suspended, its shelves spiraling endlessly. Books floated lazily, turning their own pages in a silent dance. Some titles were familiar, others entirely unknown, revealing worlds that had existed only in the minds of those long gone. The visitor reached for a book whose cover bore no title, opening it to find a story of a quiet village where autumn lasted forever, and every evening a single lantern was lit in remembrance of moments that might have been lost. The tailor stitched carefully along the edges, ensuring the narrative remained delicate, allowing it to drift through the moonscape like a whisper. A sudden flutter caught their attention. Small, silver-winged birds, each no larger than a teacup, emerged from the attic shadows. They circled the moon's patches, carrying tiny fragments of light between their wings. Each bird held a secret, a lost lullaby, a tender wish, a moment of courage unnoticed. The tailor chuckled quietly to himself. Of course, the moon required its messengers. The visitor reached out to touch one, and the bird paused mid-air, wings glinting faintly, allowing the connection. It was the kind of gentle magic that lingered in the chest long after sight or touch had passed, the sort of magic that reminded one of a soft sigh under a heavy blanket. Hours slipped by unnoticed, each stitch a lullaby, each patch a meditation. The moon, vast and stitched, hummed quietly under the tailor's careful hands. Threads connected one patch to another, bridging forests and rivers, libraries and marketplaces, binding stories into a gentle tapestry of light and memory. The visitor, now sitting on a cloud near the river of letters, watched the moon's surface ripple in response, a quiet smile illuminating their face. The attic was alive, though softly so, with the weightless rhythm of stitched stories and suspended dreams. As dawn approached in some distant world, the tailor leaned back, breath slow, feeling the pull of sleep himself. The visitor glanced at the infinite tapestry of stitched worlds, their eyes reflecting countless stories, each alive, yet held gently in place by the tailor's patience and care. "Will you come again?" they asked softly. The tailor's hands hovered above the needle for a moment, the attic quiet but for the faint hum of silver threads. "Always," he whispered, "there will always be more to stitch, more to remember, and more worlds to awaken." And so the moon waited, patched and luminous, a guardian of stories, memories, and dreams. The tailor's work continued night after night, each stitch a lullaby, each patch a quiet world. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of sleep, new stories stirred, eager for the next gentle touch of the tailor's hand. Tonight, the attic was warmer, as if the moon itself exhaled a soft sigh in anticipation of the tailor's work. The needle hovered over a new patch, one the tailor had not stitched before. It shimmered faintly, like silver fog under a sleepy dawn, and carried the faint scent of forgotten rain. This patch held a forest unlike any the tailor had seen, a forest where autumn never truly ended, and every leaf glowed softly, suspended between gold and crimson, as if caught mid-fall. The visitor stepped closer, toes brushing against clouds that felt almost tangible, like wisps of soft wool. In the forest below, tiny creatures scuttled, neither fully animals nor spirits, but something in between. They carried lanterns that held laughter, tears, and songs too, delicate for any living ears. When the tailor stitched along the edges of the forest patch, the creatures paused, their glowing eyes reflecting gratitude in quiet, subtle ways. A gentle wind rustled the leaves, and the air hummed with stories yet untold. Beyond the forest, the patch revealed a lake, perfectly still, reflecting the moon in reverse. But beneath its glassy surface swam memories of people who had once dreamed in silence. The tailor carefully stitched threads along the edges, ensuring each memory floated freely, safe from the sharp edges of reality. One memory shimmered particularly bright, a child's first glance at the night sky, wide-eyed and full of wonder. The visitor reached down to touch the lake, and ripples formed across the water, revealing other memories hidden beneath. A lost letter, a song sung quietly in a forgotten room, the warmth of a hand held once, long ago. In the distance, a bridge emerged, delicate as spun sugar, connecting this patch to another, an endless marketplace suspended in clouds. Here, merchants sold jars of forgotten dreams, bottles of sunset, and fragments of music long forgotten. The tailor paused to admire a stall offering tiny glass orbs, each containing a sigh from a distant time. The visitor leaned closer, mesmerized, and a soft melody floated up from the marketplace, almost like the forest and lake were singing together. The tailor stitched gently, letting the melody weave into the silver threads. Above, the sky swirled with colors that defied earthly description: lavender, rose gold, deep indigo, and glimmers of emerald that blinked like knowing eyes. Stars formed slowly, almost reluctantly, in clusters that reminded the tailor of scattered memories stitched together. The visitor, perched on a floating lantern, whispered stories into the wind, stories the tailor absorbed, threading them into the moon's patches. Each word became part of the moon's quilt, a quilt of whispered dreams, untold adventures and gentle magic that moved slower than time itself. A sudden shimmer drew their attention to a library suspended in clouds nearby. It was enormous tonight, its spiral shelves twisting upward endlessly. Books drifted lazily, pages turning themselves with faint rustling. Some books held histories that never happened. Others contained letters never sent, confessions whispered too softly to matter in the waking world. The tailor stitched around them, careful to let each tale remain untouched by the clumsiness of human hands. The visitor reached out and opened one, revealing a story of a city that slept beneath endless snow, where the streets were lined with lanterns that remembered the warmth of laughter. The tailor smiled quietly. It was precisely the kind of magic this night required. As the hours passed, a new kind of light appeared, threads of moonlight that wove themselves through the forests, lakes, and markets. These threads hummed softly, responding to the tender stories stitched into each patch. The creatures of the forest, the floating letters in the river, the glass orbs in the marketplace, all responded in kind, creating a subtle symphony of color and sound. It was a music only the heart could hear, a lullaby for the soul. At the edge of the moon, where clouds curled like faint whispers, a doorway appeared, new, unexpected, and shimmering. The visitor glanced at it, curiosity flickering in their eyes. "Do you think someone will come through?" they asked. The tailor's hands hovered above the needle, threads dangling like sleepy rivers of light. "Perhaps," he said softly, "and when they do, they'll find the stories waiting. Every stitch is an invitation, and every patch is a world patiently sleeping until someone cares to wake it." The night deepened, stretching time into ribbons that bent and folded like soft fabric. The attic, filled with the gentle clatter of needles and quiet hums of silver threads, seemed to breathe along with the moon. Outside, distant stars flickered knowingly, as if keeping watch over every patch, every thread, every story stitched tonight. And somewhere in that delicate quiet, the visitor felt a sense of belonging, an understanding that in this stitched world of the moon, all forgotten dreams, lost memories, and quiet magic were safe, held gently by the hands of an old tailor who understood the slow art of patience, wonder, and sleep. And with that, the attic settled into an almost imperceptible hush. The tailor leaned back, hands resting on his knees, eyes half closed, content with the night's work. The visitor perched on the lantern, gazing at the luminous quilt of the moon. A soft wind carried the scent of old paper, warm threads, and distant autumn leaves. All was still, yet alive, waiting patiently for tomorrow night, for another patch, another stitch, another story. The attic was quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of silver threads that stretched lazily across the ceiling, like a web spun by the gentlest of winds. Outside, the world slept, unaware of the moon's quiet labor. But inside, every stitch, every patch, every fragment of forgotten memory shimmered softly, waiting to be seen by someone who cared enough to notice. The visitor perched upon the lantern, toes brushing against clouds that seemed more solid tonight, as if even the air wanted to linger in this world of stitched light. The tailor picked up his needle one last time for the night. This patch, unlike any other, was simple. It held a small village tucked into a valley, trees bending in perpetual autumn, and a river that sang its own secrets. There were no creatures here, no floating markets, just quiet streets, the scent of baked bread in the air, and the soft flicker of candlelight in windows. The tailor stitched with careful, deliberate movements, each pull of thread binding warmth, hope, and memory into the silver fabric of the moon. As the last stitch was made, the patch seemed to exhale, a gentle ripple of light spreading outward. The stars above twinkled more brightly, as if approving the handiwork of this humble tailor. The visitor leaned forward, mesmerized, and saw the river shimmer with the reflections of all the stories stitched before: forests, lakes, marketplaces, libraries, and secret gardens. Each world moved in harmony now, connected by threads of silver, delicate yet unbreakable. A soft, lilting voice rose from the patches, almost imperceptible, almost like a whisper in a dream. It was the voice of all the stories, the memories, and the dreams the tailor had stitched together. It told tales of quiet bravery, gentle kindness, and the beauty found in small, unnoticed moments. The visitor realized the moon itself was singing, and the tailor, with every stitch, had become both composer and conductor of this lullaby for the universe. The attic seemed to breathe with them, the air gentle and warm. The visitor reached out, touching a thread that hummed softly beneath their fingertips. It was alive, yet comforting, like the embrace of a forgotten friend. And in that touch, the visitor felt the moon's heartbeat, the slow, deliberate pulse of stories stitched carefully over centuries, each one a promise that nothing truly beautiful is ever lost. The tailor set down his needle, hands folded over the lap, and smiled. "Every stitch," he murmured, "is a story saved. Every patch is a memory held safe. And every night the moon reminds us there is magic, even in the smallest things." The visitor nodded, understanding that the quiet power of care, patience, and gentle attention could hold entire worlds together. Outside, the clouds drifted lazily across the night sky, the stars winking knowingly, as if the entire universe had paused to watch. The moon glimmered, stitched perfectly, a tapestry of all the forgotten, lost, and quietly magical things of the world. And though the attic was silent now, it was filled with the soft glow of stories, memories, and magic. An eternal testament to the patience and wonder of a tailor who mended the moon. The visitor took a deep breath, feeling the weightless calm of the moment, and whispered, "Thank you." The tailor simply nodded, eyes half closed, content in the knowledge that tonight, as on countless nights before, the moon had been made whole again. And somewhere, far away, the universe leaned a little closer, listening to the soft hum of stitched memories waiting patiently for the next night, the next patch, the next story. And with that, the attic, the moon, and the stories within settled into a serene, timeless quiet. The magic was not loud. It did not announce itself. It simply existed in the silver threads, in the soft autumn winds, and in the gentle heart of a tailor who understood the art of dreams, of patience, and of sleep. The night passed slowly, deliberately, beautifully. And in the morning, when the world awoke, nothing had changed on the surface. But somewhere high above, the moon gleamed a little brighter, stitched together with love, memory, and infinite care, waiting for the next dreamer to come along. The first hints of dawn were just brushing the horizon, a pale wash of lavender and gold spilling over the sleeping world. In the attic, the tailor stirred slightly, though not fully awake, his hands still resting on the silver-threaded cloth that spanned the ceiling like a gentle, luminous web. He felt the quiet hum of the moon's heartbeat beneath his fingers, a rhythm that had grown familiar over countless nights. The visitor, still perched near the lantern, watched as the tailor's eyes half-lidded with contentment, and a soft smile curved his lips, like someone recalling a favorite memory they weren't ready to let go of. A subtle breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of autumn leaves, damp earth, and distant rain. The tailor lifted a hand, allowing it to brush against the floating silver threads. Each thread vibrated softly at his touch, sending delicate waves of light rippling across the attic walls. With every ripple, another tiny story flickered into view. A forgotten dream of a child, a lost letter never mailed, a song once hummed on a rainy afternoon. The visitor leaned forward, mesmerized, feeling as if they were peering into the very essence of memory and magic stitched into the fabric of the universe. Tonight, or rather this night, was different. A new patch, larger than any before, waited patiently at the edge of the moon's darkened surface. It was not the tailor's choice. It had appeared on its own, whispering possibilities of unseen worlds, stories yearning to be stitched into existence. The tailor reached for his needle, and as he did, the visitor noticed a faint shimmer, almost like a heartbeat of light, pulsing along the edges of this new patch. The threads seemed alive, moving of their own accord, beckoning him to begin. He began to stitch, slowly, deliberately, each motion meditative, each pull of thread embedding the essence of unseen realms. The patch revealed a forest, unlike any the visitor had seen before. Trees whose leaves glowed softly in hues of amber and violet, rivers that flowed upward into the sky, and creatures that shimmered with an iridescent sheen, blending magic with the ordinary. It was a world of possibilities, of stories yet untold, and the tailor's needle became a wand guiding it into reality. The visitor whispered softly, as though afraid to break the delicate rhythm of creation. "Who lives here?" The tailor chuckled gently, a sound like soft wind through chimes. "This isn't for anyone yet," he said. "It waits for the right dreamer to find it." Sometimes, worlds exist first in silence, in patience, before someone walks through their streets, sings their songs, or learns their secrets. As the patch grew, More threads began to shimmer in response, threads that Tailor had stitched in nights past. It was as if the moon itself was acknowledging the new addition, blending its glow with the old, creating a seamless tapestry of light, memory, and magic. The attic was filled with a quiet luminescence, soft yet radiant, comforting yet full of possibility. The visitor felt their mind drift, almost weightless, carried along with the gentle rhythm of stitches, the hush of the universe, and the tender labor of a man who mended not just the moon, but the very stories that made it whole. And as the first light of dawn spilled fully into the room, the tailor set down his needle, hands resting lightly upon the patch. Another world stitched, he murmured, and another story waits to be told. But for now, it sleeps. The visitor smiled, understanding the quiet profundity of the moment. Creation, patience, and magic did not need applause. They simply existed, like the steady pulse of the moon, like the silver threads above, like the soft hush of the universe whispering good night to itself. And so the attic fell into stillness once more, a haven of calm silver light and infinite stories, each waiting for the night, for the stitch, and for a dreamer to come along. The moon hung low now, its glow mellow and expansive, spilling a silvery light across the attic like liquid peace. The tailor rose slowly from his chair, stretching his aged back with a soft sigh. Tonight's work had been different, somehow heavier yet lighter at the same time, as if the moon itself had leaned closer to watch him stitch. The visitor noticed this, a quiet reverence settling over them both. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next stitch, the next story to awaken. From the corner of the attic, a tiny ripple of starlight pulsed gently, unnoticed at first, then brighter, like a distant bell calling softly. The tailor followed it instinctively, as though he had done this 1,000 times, though each time was new, each story fresh. His hands hovered over a delicate patch that shimmered faintly, like morning frost kissed by moonlight. This patch was peculiar. It was filled with shadows that weren't quite dark and lights that didn't quite illuminate. It was a place between worlds, the kind of realm that only appeared in the quiet edge of memory, where dreams tiptoe and secrets linger. He threaded his needle, the silver glint catching the faint starlight, and began stitching again. Each stitch was slower than the last, more deliberate, as though he were coaxing the patch awake rather than forcing it into shape. Slowly, the shapes began to solidify. A city of crystal towers, their spires twisting like the spirals of galaxies, bridges that arched impossibly high, and rivers of liquid starlight that sang as they flowed. Strange figures moved in the city, barely visible at first, then more clearly, beings with translucent wings, faces etched with memories of worlds long forgotten, and eyes that shimmered with understanding beyond time. The visitor whispered, "Do they know we're here?" The tailor smiled softly. "Not yet," he said. "This place waits for its first dreamer, the one who will walk these streets and give voice to its stories. Until then, it lives quietly in the moon's glow, stitched from hope, patience, and a little bit of lonely magic. Outside, the clouds drifted lazily across the night sky, carrying the faint hum of the world below. From these clouds, faint echoes of dreams floated up, laughter of children, whispered promises, forgotten melodies. The attic became a gentle prism of light and sound, a sanctuary where stories lived and breathed. The tailor's needle moved with purpose, threading not just fabric but fragments of memory, fragments of forgotten joy and sorrow, weaving them into the silver patch until it glowed with quiet life. At last, he leaned back, hands trembling slightly from the effort, though his eyes were bright with satisfaction. The patch had been completed, stitched seamlessly into the moon's surface, shimmering like a promise kept. The visitor felt a profound calm settle over them, the kind of calm that only comes from witnessing creation without haste, without expectation, a calm that leaves the heart lighter and the mind softer. The tailor looked at the visitor and said, "One more stitch, one more story, and the moon will sleep easy tonight. And perhaps so will we." A faint smile played on his lips as he set the needle down, letting the attic fall into a hush filled with silver light, memory, and infinite possibility. Outside, the moon shone fuller than ever, each dark spot now a story, each story now a piece of the universe's quiet heartbeat. And somewhere in that glow, dreams waited, as they always do, for someone to notice, to wonder, and to remember. The attic was silent now, save for the faint rustle of threads settling into place, like soft whispers of old memories returning home. The tailor sat back, his hands resting lightly on his knees, watching the moon through the open skylight. It was whole tonight, its silver glow warm and inviting, the dark spots now patches of stories that shimmered like quiet stars. The visitor finally spoke, their voice barely above a whisper. "It's beautiful. I've never seen anything like it." The tailor nodded slowly, a faint smile curling his lips. "It's not about seeing," he said. "It's about remembering. Each patch is a story someone once dreamed, a memory someone almost forgot, stitched carefully so the world might never lose it entirely." Outside, the night deepened, and the sky wrapped the world in its velvet embrace. Clouds drifted past lazily, catching glimpses of the patched moon and scattering its silver light across the quiet streets below. Somewhere far away, a child stirred in sleep, dreaming of a city made of stars, or a river that sang names, or a tailor who stitched the moon. Each dream was soft, untethered, and infinite. The tailor rose slowly, feeling the weight of years in his bones, but also a lightness in his heart. Tonight's work was complete, but the moon would always need mending, always need stories, always need someone to care. That was the quiet magic of it, patience, love, and the steady rhythm of creation, stitch by stitch. He turned to the visitor, who now understood, without words, the infinite value of what had just been witnessed. Some things, they realized, weren't meant to be explained, just felt, remembered, and held softly in the heart. The tailor nodded to them once more, and together they stepped back, letting the moon hang quietly in the sky, a perfect circle of silver light, alive with stories, waiting patiently for the next dreamer. And with that, the attic became still. The stars above pulsed gently, and the world slept a little deeper, comforted by the quiet knowledge that somewhere, someone always tended to the forgotten stories of the universe. The moon, patched and gleaming, watched over it all. The visitor whispered a soft "good night," and the tailor returned the gesture with a quiet nod. Outside, the wind hummed a lullaby, the kind that travels through valleys and across seas, carrying the gentle reassurance that no story is ever truly lost. And somewhere in the silent shimmer of the moon's glow, stitched with silver and magic, the universe exhaled peace. The attic was empty now, but the air still hummed with quiet magic. The tailor had gone for a slow walk under the night sky, letting the cool autumn breeze brush against his cheeks. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if the moon itself had lent him its silver glow. Far above, the patched moon watched silently, serene and full of whispered stories. Tiny motes of light danced along the edges of the clouds, glinting like memories in motion. Somewhere below, the city slept unaware, cradled by the gentle rhythm of the universe. The visitor lingered by the skylight, thinking of all the stories stitched into the moon tonight, stories of love, of loss, of quiet wonder, of laughter no one had heard in decades. And then, with a soft sigh, they understood the beauty of the tailor's work, that some care is invisible, some magic is silent, and some stories are meant to live in the hush between heartbeats. The tailor returned, carrying a small lantern, its glow warm and comforting. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Together, they looked up, letting the light of the moon wash over them, a gentle promise that the world still held quiet miracles if you only noticed. And as they stepped back into the shadows of the night, the moon's silver light seemed to hum a lullaby for all those dreaming, a soft reminder that even the smallest patch, even the tiniest story, could hold the universe together, one stitch at a time. The wind carried the sound of invisible threads pulling gently, of stories settling, of hearts remembering. And somewhere, quietly, endlessly, the moon waited for the next dreamer to arrive. The epilogue closed not with endings, but with the gentle continuity of care, magic, and remembrance. Because the moon, stitched with love, never truly sleeps. The streets below were hushed now, bathed in the gentle silver of a fully mended moon. Lanterns flickered in distant windows, like tiny stars borrowed from the sky above, each one guarding the quiet dreams of someone inside. The tailor stood once more beneath the skylight, brushing a finger along the moon's soft glow, feeling the subtle warmth of all the stories stitched into its surface. He could almost hear the echoes of forgotten songs, of laughter carried across centuries, mingling with the sighs of the night wind. A soft, unseen presence brushed past him. The visitor, now silent, content. No words were needed. The tailor nodded slightly, a quiet acknowledgement that magic, even in its smallest acts, was enough to hold the night together. He thought of all the moons he had patched before, all the stories they held, and realized that every stitch, every thread, every tiny act of care was a conversation with the universe itself. And perhaps, in some unseen corner of the cosmos, another Tailor was waiting, another story ready to unfold. The sky shimmered faintly, clouds drifting lazily, carrying the soft hum of dreams. Somewhere, far away, a child yawned, a poet scribbled a quiet verse, a musician strummed a gentle tune. All were part of the same tapestry, all held in the soft embrace of a moon that never truly slept. The tailor finally turned away from the skylight, lantern in hand, walking into the quiet streets below. The night carried him forward, a companion in silver light, and behind him the moon hummed its lullaby, a final, gentle promise that no story, no dream, no stitch of care would ever truly be forgotten. And so the night breathed, slowly, calmly, as if the universe itself were exhaling, ready to dream once again. The morning never truly arrived, not in the way one expects. Instead, the horizon shimmered with the pale gold of early dawn, but the moon lingered still, patched and whole, watching over the world with quiet patience. The tailor, now walking along the cobblestone streets, noticed that even the shadows seemed softer, as though the night itself had learned to whisper rather than shout. He paused by a small fountain, its water catching the faint moonlight, reflecting tiny, dancing stories across its ripples. Each ripple told of someone, somewhere, dreaming. A poet finally finishing a stanza, a child imagining a far-off land, a traveler finding a long-lost path. The tailor smiled, knowing that the stories stitched into the moon were now spilling gently into the world below, weaving unseen connections across hearts and minds. And then he saw it, a single delicate thread of silver stretching from the moon to the fountain. It pulsed softly, inviting him, reminding him that every stitch, every small act of care was never truly done. He reached out a hand, and the thread seemed to hum under his fingers, a subtle vibration like a lullaby carried across time. Somewhere, far above, hidden among clouds and constellations, the other worlds the moon had collected whispered back, tiny voices intertwining in a soft chorus. The tailor knew that tomorrow, the day after, or 100 nights hence, he might not be the only one tending to these stories. Others would come, guided by the soft magic of the moon, adding their own gentle stitches to the vast tapestry of dreams. He turned back toward the quiet streets, feeling the weight of centuries of stories in his hands, in his heart. The city exhaled with him, as if recognizing the tenderness in his steps. And as the faint gold of dawn and the soft silver of the moon merged on the horizon, the tailor whispered to himself, and perhaps to the universe itself, that every patch, every stitch, every act of care mattered, because in the end, even the smallest gestures could mend the darkness. And so, he walked on, carrying with him the soft promise of dreams kept safe, of stories never lost, and of nights filled with quiet, magical wonder. The tailor's footsteps echoed faintly along the cobblestones, but there was no hurry in his movement. Each step felt like a soft heartbeat in the stillness, in rhythm with the patched moon above. Somewhere in the distance, the first birds of autumn tried to remember how to sing, their notes tentative, as if testing the morning air that had been touched by the moon's silver light. He paused beneath a twisted oak, its branches heavy with amber leaves that shimmered as though sprinkled with stardust. In the shadow of the tree, he noticed a tiny door carved into its trunk, one he had never seen before. A faint glow pulsed from inside, soft as the hush of a lullaby. Curiosity, gentle and inviting, nudged him forward. He knelt, brushing away a pile of golden leaves, and pressed his hand to the warm wooden surface. The door swung open without resistance. Inside was a room no bigger than a closet, filled with shelves of bottles containing fragments of forgotten moments. Laughter long vanished, sunsets that had never been captured in memory, and music that had drifted away into silence. A tiny bell chimed softly as he entered, announcing him to the quiet magic that lingered here. The tailor realized that this room, hidden in plain sight within the heart of the oak, was another stitch in the world's vast tapestry of dreams. And here, the moon's influence seemed strongest. Every bottle vibrated with the faint pulse of distant nights, of worlds unseen and stories untold. He reached for one, and a swirl of golden light wrapped around his fingers, whispering of a memory long forgotten, a child laughing under the rain, a love letter never sent, a melody that had slipped through time. He smiled. Perhaps this was the true purpose of his nightly work, not merely to mend the moon, but to guard these hidden treasures, to ensure that no story, no dream would ever fade entirely. And as he placed the bottle back, it seemed to hum in contentment, as if acknowledging that the right hands had held it. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and distant seas. The moon above twinkled as though smiling down upon him, and the tailor felt a quiet certainty. The world was full of small wonders, stitched carefully between shadows and light, waiting for those patient enough to notice. He stepped back into the streets, leaving the oak and its secret room behind, carrying with him a weightless sense of purpose. Tonight, tomorrow, and the nights after, he would continue stitching. Not only to mend the moon, but to cradle the fragile beauty of stories, of dreams, of the unseen magic that made the world worth noticing in the quietest hours. And so, the tailor walked on, with the whisper of the oak and the hum of the moon guiding his steps, a guardian of what others might never see, but would always feel. The night air wrapped around the tailor like a velvet shawl, carrying the faint aroma of autumn fires from distant cottages. The streets were empty, yet they seemed alive with quiet anticipation, as if the city itself were holding its breath for the moon's next stitch. Each step he took echoed softly, not with the clatter of movement, but with the gentle rhythm of thought, each thought unfolding into another story, like ripples across a still pond. Ahead, a narrow alley glimmered with the faint reflection of moonlight. The tailor turned into it, his eyes catching a flicker of motion. A small cat with fur the color of twilight, sitting upon a crate as though waiting for him. The cat blinked slowly, deliberate and knowing, before hopping gracefully to a lower ledge and disappearing into shadow. He followed, though not hurriedly, sensing that this was another quiet invitation to a hidden story, one the moon had reserved for tonight. The alley opened into a courtyard, bathed in a gentle silver glow, lined with lanterns that seemed suspended in the air rather than fixed to posts. In the center, a fountain whispered softly, water flowing upwards instead of down, each droplet catching light as though sprinkled with crushed stars. And there, perched on the fountain's edge, was a tiny stool, just his size, as if waiting for him to sit. He did, and the air thickened with the quiet pulse of magic. From the fountain rose delicate threads of light, weaving themselves slowly into shapes. Scenes from dreams of people who had walked the earth centuries ago, fragments of whispered wishes, and echoes of laughter that had long faded. The tailor reached out, allowing his fingers to brush a shimmering ribbon, and instantly he was aware of the memory it contained, a sailor's promise to a distant lover, written on a scrap of parchment and lost in a storm, now replayed in silver threads above the fountain. He traced another ribbon, and a child's forgotten bedtime song spilled into the air, soft and tender, as if the world had been holding its breath for this very note to be heard again. The moonlight caught in his eyes, and for a moment he felt an overwhelming kinship with every soul that had ever dreamed, hoped, or whispered to the stars. And then, almost imperceptibly, the threads of light coalesced into a new story, one that was not yet finished. A girl appeared, her hair like spun gold and her eyes holding the calm depth of autumn lakes. She extended her hand toward the tailor, inviting him into a memory that had never fully come to life. He reached back, and in that simple gesture, the fountain shimmered brighter, as if acknowledging the convergence of two worlds, the one stitched by the moon and the one stitched by human longing. For hours that no one counted, the tailor and the girl traced the stories, following each silver thread into forgotten corners of the world. The moon above seemed to pulse in time with their movements, mending its dark patches with each gentle stitch, and in doing so, casting a blanket of serene light across the sleeping city. As dawn approached, subtle and quiet, the tailor rose, leaving the girl as gently as he had found her, knowing that some stories were meant to be visited, not possessed. The fountain's threads faded, returning to the quiet hum of memory, and the courtyard became still once more. Yet the echo of that night remained, as if the city itself had breathed a sigh of contentment, and the moon, patched and whole, smiled down upon the world it had quietly watched for centuries. The tailor walked back to his workshop, his steps unhurried, his heart calm, carrying with him the delicate weight of untold stories and the soft knowledge that every stitch, every thread, every gentle touch of magic mattered, even in the quietest hours of night. The first rays of dawn barely touched the edges of the city, spilling gold across rooftops and alleyways. The tailor stood at the doorway of his workshop, leaning lightly on his old wooden cane, and gazed up at the moon, now patched and radiant, as if smiling in quiet gratitude. The night's labor had stitched together not just its dark spots, but fragments of countless stories. Stories of longing, of forgotten dreams, and gentle magic that hummed softly beneath the surface of everyday life. Inside the workshop, his tools rested in patient stillness. Threads of silver, spun from moonlight itself, lay coiled like sleeping serpents, ready for the next evening's work. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, of candle smoke and starlight, comforting scents that whispered of countless nights spent mending the impossible. He thought of the girl at the fountain, the one who had held the threads of memory in her delicate hands, guiding him through stories of forgotten hopes. She had vanished as quietly as she had appeared, leaving only a glimmer of light where her presence had been. And yet, the echo of her laughter lingered, mingling with the sighs of the city, the gentle rustling of autumn leaves, and the soft, lingering glow of a moon made whole. The tailor smiled, not broadly, but in the quiet, knowing way of those who have lived in the company of wonders too subtle for most eyes. Every stitch he had made had been more than repair. It had been a conversation with the world itself, a reminder that even the smallest acts of care can leave traces of magic. He returned to his chair, opening a small, leather-bound notebook that had traveled with him through decades of nights. On its pages were sketches of moons with patched scars, scribbled notes of dreams collected, and tiny observations about the people and places he had glimpsed through silver threads. He wrote one last line, simple and unhurried, capturing the essence of the night's work. Every story matters, every stitch counts, and the moon watches patiently as we sleep. Outside, the city began to stir, bathed in gentle morning light, unaware of the quiet miracles woven above their heads. The moon lingered, faint but steady, a sentinel of dreams, patched and whole. The tailor, now ready for a rare rest, closed his eyes, listening to the soft rhythm of a world gently breathing, knowing that tomorrow night he would return, as he always had, to stitch, to listen, and to remember. And in the silence, a final thread of magic wove through the air, invisible but felt, a promise that stories never truly end, that every night holds the possibility of wonder, and that even the darkest spots can be mended, one quiet stitch at a time. The workshop was still, the city slept, and the moon, stitched by hands both careful and gentle, shone peacefully over all.